What if I told you that 7 minutes ago, Canada's most respected police force quietly signed arrest warrants that could destroy everything you thought you knew about two missing children? What if the man who claimed to hold the key to their salvation was actually the architect of their continued nightmare? My name is your channel name, and before we dive into one of the most shocking betrayals in recent Canadian true crime history, I need you to do something. If you believe that Lily and Jack Sullivan deserve justice, hit that subscribe button right now. It costs you nothing, but it means everything to families like theirs who are fighting for truth in a world full of lies. 2 months ago, 8-year-old Lily Sullivan and her 6-year-old brother Jack vanished without a trace from their rural Nova Scotia community. What started as a desperate search for two innocent children became something far more sinister, a web of deception, profit, and manipulation that would ultimately lead to one man's downfall. But this isn't just another missing persons case. This is the story of how hope can be weaponized, how tragedy can be monetized, and how one person's lies can derail an entire investigation while two children remain lost in the wilderness. The man at the center of the storm? Darren Geddes, a self-proclaimed truth seeker who built a massive online following by claiming he had found Lily and Jack alive. For weeks, thousands of Canadians hung on his every word, donated their hard-earned money to his cause, and shared his content across every social media platform imaginable. They believed in him. They trusted him. They were wrong. Because 7 minutes ago, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police did something that would send shockwaves through the true crime community. They signed arrest warrants for the very man who promised to bring these children home. And the evidence they've uncovered will make you question everything you thought you knew about this case. This is a story about the dark side of viral fame, about how easy it is to manipulate grief, and about the dangerous consequences when someone decides to play God with other people's tragedy. But most importantly, this is still a story about two missing children who deserve better than the circus their disappearance became. So settle in, because what you're about to hear will challenge everything you believe about truth, justice, and the power of social media in the digital age. And I promise you this, by the end of this story, you'll never look at missing persons cases the same way again. The disappearance. May 2nd started like any other spring morning in rural Nova Scotia. The sun was climbing over the rolling hills near Lanceville Station, painting the countryside in soft golden hues. 8-year-old Lily Sullivan was already up, her blonde hair catching the early light as she helped her mother, Malaya, prepare breakfast. Her younger brother Jack, just 6 years old with that mischievous smile that could melt anyone's heart, was still rubbing sleep from his eyes. No one could have imagined that this ordinary Tuesday would become the day that changed everything. The Sullivan family had been staying at a relative's property, a sprawling piece of land that backed up to dense Nova Scotian wilderness. It was the kind of place where children could run free, where the biggest worry was making sure they came in before dark. Lily and Jack had spent countless hours exploring the treeline, building forts, and pretending to be adventurers in their own backyard kingdom. But sometime between breakfast and lunch, those two adventurers stepped into the forest and never came out. Malaya Sullivan will never forget the moment she realized her children were gone. She had called their names once, expecting to hear their laughter echoing back through the trees. When silence answered instead, she called again, louder this time, with that first flutter of maternal concern in her chest. Still nothing. What started as calling became searching. What started as searching became panic. And what started as panic became every parent's worst nightmare realized. By 2 p.m., the local RCMP detachment had been notified. By 3 p.m., search and rescue teams were mobilizing. By sunset, dozens of volunteers were combing through hundreds of acres of unforgiving wilderness, their flashlights cutting through the growing darkness like desperate prayers made visible. The Nova Scotia wilderness is beautiful, but it's also merciless. Dense forests give way to rocky terrain, hidden ravines, and streams that can turn deadly after spring rains. For two small children, one in a pink jacket, the other in blue, the woods that had seemed like a playground in daylight transformed into something far more threatening as night fell. Belinda Gray, the children's grandmother, arrived at the search headquarters with tears already streaming down her face. She had raised these children, loved them, watched them grow from babies into the bright, curious souls who now faced their first night alone in the wilderness. "They're smart kids," she told anyone who would listen. "Lily looks after Jack. She's always looked after Jack. They'll find somewhere safe to wait for us." But as the hours turned to days, that maternal optimism began to crack under the weight of reality. The initial search efforts were massive. The RCMP's ground search and rescue team coordinated with local volunteer groups, bringing in tracking dogs, all-terrain vehicles, and even helicopters to scan the vast wilderness from above. Every trail was walked, every stream was searched, every possible hiding spot was investigated. And yet, Lily and Jack remained ghosts in the forest. What made the search even more challenging was the terrain itself. This wasn't a typical suburban missing persons case, where children might hide in a neighbor's garage or get lost in a local park. This was hundreds of square kilometers of dense wilderness, complete with cliff faces, river systems, and wildlife that included black bears and coyotes. Search Coordinator Sergeant Mike Roberts had seen missing children cases before, but something about this one felt different from the start. The children had vanished so completely, so thoroughly, that it was as if the forest had simply swallowed them whole. In cases like this, we usually find some trace within the first 48 hours, he would later tell reporters. A piece of clothing, footprints, something. But with Lily and Jack, it was like they had simply ceased to exist. The community response was immediate and overwhelming. Lanceville Station was a small, tight-knit community where everyone knew everyone, and the disappearance of 2 local children galvanized residents in a way that few had ever seen before. Local businesses donated supplies. Restaurants provided free meals for search volunteers. Churches opened their doors as coordination centers. Social media groups sprouted up overnight, with hundreds of people sharing photos, organizing search parties, and spreading the word across the province. But as the days stretched into weeks, something else began to happen. The initial rush of community support started to fracture under the strain of continued failure. Questions began to surface. Theories started to multiply. And in that environment of growing desperation and confusion, the stage was set for someone to step forward and claim they had the answers everyone was desperately seeking. Someone like Darren Geddes. But before we meet the man who would ultimately exploit this family's tragedy for his own gain, we need to understand just how desperate the situation had become. Because it's only in that context of overwhelming grief, confusion, and need for hope that we can truly understand how so many intelligent, caring people could be so completely deceived. 3 weeks after Lily and Jack Sullivan vanished into the Nova Scotia wilderness, a new voice emerged from the chaos of social media speculation and amateur detective work. His name was Darren Geddes, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone who possessed information that others could only dream of. Geddes wasn't a police officer. He wasn't a professional investigator. He wasn't even from Nova Scotia. But what he lacked in credentials, he more than made up for in conviction and charisma. His first appearance in the online discussions about the Sullivan children was unremarkable, just another concerned Canadian adding his voice to the thousands of others sharing theories and expressing sympathy. But there was something different about the way Geddes presented himself, a certainty in his posts that stood out against the backdrop of confusion and speculation. "I've been following this case closely," he wrote in one of his early Facebook posts. "And I think everyone's looking in the wrong places." It was a bold statement from someone with no apparent connection to the case, but it caught attention. And attention, as Geddes would quickly learn, was a powerful currency in the world of viral tragedy. Within days, Geddes had created his own Facebook group dedicated to the search for Lily and Jack. He called it Truth Seekers for Lily and Jack, and position himself as someone willing to ask the hard questions that official investigators might be too constrained to pursue. His early posts were carefully calculated to build credibility. He shared detailed maps of the search area, analyzed weather patterns from the day the children disappeared, and offered thoughtful commentary on search techniques. To casual observers, he appeared to be exactly what he claimed to be, a dedicated citizen investigator using his skills to help find 2 missing children. But it was his live streams that truly set Getty's apart from the crowd of online amateur detectives. Broadcasting from what appeared to be a professional home studio, complete with multiple cameras and high-quality audio equipment, Getty's presented himself as the authoritative voice on the Sullivan case. He had charts, graphs, and maps spread across his desk like a television detective. He spoke with the measured cadence of someone used to being listened to, someone whose words carried weight. "Good evening, truth seekers," he would begin each broadcast, looking directly into the camera with intense, unwavering eyes. "I'm here tonight because Lily and Jack Sullivan deserve better than what they're getting from the official investigation." It was a powerful hook, the idea that the authorities were somehow failing these children, and that only Getty's had the courage and insight to fill that gap. For viewers desperate for progress in a case that seemed to have stalled, it was exactly what they wanted to hear. Getty's claimed to have sources within the RCMP who were feeding him information that wasn't being shared with the public. He hinted at evidence that had been overlooked, search areas that had been inadequately covered, and investigative leads that were being ignored due to bureaucratic incompetence. More importantly, he claimed to have developed his own network of volunteers who were conducting independent searches based on his analysis of the case. These weren't just keyboard warriors, he insisted. These were boots-on-the-ground searchers who were actually out in the wilderness following leads that the official investigation had missed. And then came the claims that would make him famous. "I have reason to believe," Getty's announced during one particularly well-viewed live stream, "that Lily and Jack Sullivan are alive. Not only alive, but safe. Hidden but safe." The comments section exploded. Viewers flooded the chat with questions, prayers, and demands for more information. How did he know? Where were they? When would they be reunited with their family? Getty's played it perfectly, revealing just enough to maintain credibility while withholding enough to keep viewers coming back for more. He spoke of ongoing operations and sensitive information that he couldn't fully share without jeopardizing the children's safety. "I understand your frustration," he would tell his growing audience. "But sometimes the most important work happens in the shadows. Sometimes the people who care most are the ones who can't speak loudest." It was masterful manipulation disguised as noble restraint. By positioning himself as someone with inside knowledge that he couldn't fully share, Getty's created an aura of credibility while avoiding the scrutiny that would come with making specific, verifiable claims. His following grew exponentially. What started as a few hundred followers quickly became thousands, then tens of thousands. His live streams regularly drew audiences in the thousands, with viewers from across Canada and beyond tuning in for updates on the case. The comment sections became communities unto themselves, with regular viewers developing relationships and shared theories. Getty's encouraged this, often reading comments aloud during his broadcasts and engaging directly with his most dedicated followers. "Thank you, Sarah from Calgary, for your continued support," he might say, reading from the chat. "And yes, Michael from Toronto, I can confirm that we're following up on that lead you mentioned." It created a sense of intimacy and inclusion that traditional media couldn't match. These weren't passive consumers of news. They were active participants in what felt like a real investigation led by someone who actually cared about finding Lily and Jack. But perhaps most importantly, Getty's tapped into something that the official investigation couldn't provide: hope. While RCMP briefings became increasingly somber as the weeks passed without progress, Getty's remained consistently optimistic. He spoke of the children as if their safe return was not just possible but inevitable. He painted pictures of emotional reunions and happy endings that stood in stark contrast to the growing fears that Lily and Jack might never be found alive. For family members watching their worst nightmare play out in slow motion, for community members feeling helpless in the face of tragedy, and for viewers across the country who had become emotionally invested in the case, Getty's offered something precious: the belief that this story might still have a happy ending. And that belief, as we'll see, would become both his greatest weapon and his ultimate downfall. But before we dive into how Getty's built his empire of deception, let's talk about what was really happening behind the scenes. Because while he was building his reputation as the voice of truth in the Sullivan case, the real investigators were beginning to notice some disturbing patterns in his behavior. It was a Tuesday evening in late June when everything changed. The Sullivan case had been dominating Canadian true crime social media for weeks, with Darren Getty's increasingly confident claims about the children's welfare serving as a beacon of hope for thousands of desperate followers. Then, without warning, a single audio clip surfaced that would turn Getty's from a controversial figure into a viral sensation overnight. The audio was brief, less than 30 seconds, but its impact was seismic. The voice was unmistakably Getty's, though the quality was poor, distorted in a way that suggested it had been recorded secretly or transmitted through some kind of encrypted communication system. "I got to them," the voice said, barely above a whisper, but filled with unmistakable urgency. "Oh boy, and I can't say who they are, and I can't really say, that's fine. And I can't really say what they told me, but it's ironclad. It's 1000% true. Okay, I know exactly what happened to the kids. The kids are alive. Imagine this." The audio cut off abruptly, leaving listeners with more questions than answers, but also with something they had been desperately craving, apparent confirmation that Lily and Jack Sullivan were still alive. The clip first appeared on Reddit, posted by an anonymous user who claimed to have intercepted it from an encrypted communication channel. Within hours, it had been downloaded thousands of times, shared across every major social media platform, and analyzed by amateur audio experts who confirmed that the voice pattern matched Getty's known speech patterns. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Facebook groups dedicated to the Sullivan case exploded with activity. The original Reddit thread where the audio was posted received thousands of comments within hours. Twitter hashtags related to the case began trending across Canada. And most importantly for Getty's, his own social media following skyrocketed as people flocked to hear more from the man who apparently had direct contact with the missing children. "This changes everything," wrote one Facebook user whose comment received hundreds of likes. "If Darren has actually found them, why isn't this bigger news? Why aren't the police acting on this?" It was exactly the reaction Getty's had been hoping for, and he played it perfectly. Rather than immediately claiming credit for the audio or providing additional details, Getty's initially remained silent. For nearly 24 hours after the clip surfaced, his social media accounts went dark, his scheduled live streams were canceled, and his most dedicated followers were left to speculate about what the audio meant and whether their hero was in some kind of danger. The silence only amplified the mystery and, by extension, Getty's growing legend. When he finally returned to social media, it was with a carefully crafted message that managed to acknowledge the audio without explicitly confirming or denying his involvement. "I've been made aware of audio circulating online that some people believe is connected to me," he posted to his Facebook page. "I can't comment on ongoing operations or confirm the authenticity of any recordings. What I can say is that my commitment to finding Lily and Jack remains absolute, and I will never stop fighting for the truth, regardless of the personal cost." It was a masterpiece of strategic ambiguity. By neither confirming nor denying the audio, Getty's allowed his followers to draw their own conclusions while maintaining plausible deniability. The reference to ongoing operations and personal cost added layers of intrigue that his audience eagerly consumed. But perhaps most importantly, the post positioned Getty's as someone who was potentially in danger because of his dedication to the case, a martyr figure whose silence was evidence of his nobility rather than his deception. The comment section of that post became a rally cry for his supporters. "Stay safe, Darren. We know you're doing everything you can. Don't let them silence you. Lily and Jack need you. The truth will come out. Thank you for everything you're doing." The leaked audio had transformed Getty's from a controversial amateur investigator into something approaching a folk hero. He was no longer just someone with theories about the case. He was someone with apparent direct knowledge, someone who had managed to accomplish what trained professionals could not. The timing of the audio leak was particularly significant. It came at a moment when the official investigation appeared to be stalling. The RCMP's daily press briefings had become increasingly brief and uninformative. The initial rush of community volunteers had begun to dwindle as the search stretched into its second month. Public attention was starting to wane, and family members were growing visibly frustrated with the lack of progress. Into that vacuum of hope and information stepped Getty's, armed with an audio clip that seemed to prove he had succeeded where everyone else had failed. But while thousands of people were celebrating what they believed was a breakthrough in the case, a smaller group of individuals was beginning to ask more skeptical questions. Professional audio analysts noted that the quality of the recording was inconsistent with the type of secure communication systems that someone in Getty's claimed position would likely be using. The distortion patterns suggested the audio had been deliberately altered, possibly to disguise the circumstances under which it was recorded. More troubling were the inconsistencies in Getty's story when examined closely. If he truly had direct contact with the children or their location, why was he still conducting public live streams rather than working directly with official investigators? If the information was as sensitive as he claimed, why risk compromising an ongoing operation by allowing audio evidence to leak online? And perhaps most importantly, if Lily and Jack were truly safe and in hiding as the audio suggested, why hadn't their family been informed? These questions were raised by a growing number of skeptics in various online forums, but they were largely drowned out by the excitement and hope generated by the audio leak. Getty's supporters dismissed the skeptics as cynics who were jealous of his success or, worse, as individuals who were somehow complicit in covering up the truth. The leaked audio had accomplished exactly what Getty's needed. It had elevated him from just another voice in the crowd to the central figure in one of Canada's most high-profile missing persons cases. He was no longer chasing the story. He had become the story. But as we'll see, that elevated profile came with increased scrutiny. And increased scrutiny was the last thing that Darren Gettys could afford. Because while he was basking in his newfound fame as the man who had apparently found Lily and Jack Sullivan, professional investigators were beginning to take a much closer look at his claims. And what they would discover would ultimately bring his entire house of lies crashing down. If you believe children's lives matter, if you think the truth deserves to be heard, then prove it.
Subscribe now.
Because every subscriber is a voice demanding justice for Jack and Lily Sullivan.